Rastafari, Ethiopianism and Pan-Africanism, PT2. Mr. Garvey refocused our attention to Africa. He taught his Christian base to see from the spectacle of Ethiopia. He stated that his program stopped short of hero worshipping and other similar ideological techniques. There has been many offshoots and splinter groups of the Garvey movement. Grover Cleveland Redding called himself the Abyssinian. He was a 1920s black nationalist, religious leader, and early Pan-African activist. He is best known for founding the short-lived Star Order of Ethiopia in Chicago. This becomes relevant in order to understand the development of Rastafari as a movement and its relation to 1920s black radicalism. Redding was influenced heavily by the 1919 diplomatic mission that was sent to the United States by the then Ethiopian regent Rastafari, later Emperor Haile Selassie I. Grover Redding rejected United States citizenship under the oppressive Jim Crow system and chose to identify as an Ethiopian. He and his associates sold pamphlets and a picture with the regent Rastafari for $1. On Sunday, June 20, 1920, Redding led a small procession through Chicago's South Side, while riding a white stallion and wearing symbolic, regal robes. The parade ended on East 35th Street, where he produced an American flag, poured gasoline over it, and set it on fire in open defiance of the United States government. When police officers and bystanders tried to intervene, a violent street skirmish broke out. Shots were fired, resulting in the deaths of 2 white men, including an American sailor, and injuring several others. Redding and several of his followers were arrested and charged with murder. According to police records, Redding confessed to instigating the event and burning the flag. He maintained during his trial that he was a prince of Abyssinia, and was simply trying to lead his people back to their true homeland. He was found guilty and executed by hanging in Illinois in 1921. His final words right before his death were, "I have something to say, but not at this time." Leonard Perceval Howell is understood to have been a Garvite himself. Upon his return to Jamaica, he had cut out a picture of Emperor Haile Selassie from the local Jamaican newspaper and promoted it all over the island. He was able to amass a following. The basis of his idea was political, but at the same time it was backed by the sense that Haile Selassie was the returned Messiah. He rooted the grassroots Jamaican identity in Ethiopia, and this naturally challenged the notion of British sovereignty over the people Jamaica pre-independence. Leonard Howell was a Jamaican who had traveled to the United States as a seaman. He was exposed to Garvey's philosophy and many of the ideas that stemmed from it. He returned to Jamaica in the 1930s. His theory emphasized the fact that in the King James Version of the Bible, the Book of Psalms also references the emperor's titles. Titles such as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Elect of God, Conquering Lion of the Tribe of Judah. The scriptures go on to say Selah. This was enough to convince many of the early Rastafarian leaders. When the emperor's plane landed in Jamaica on April 21, 1966, all protocols were broken. Thousands of people descended on the tarmac even before the plane landed. Tens of thousands of people lined the streets of Kingston to witness the motorcade. The visit became a celebration the moment the Ethiopian plane touched the ground at the Palisados airport. Rasta men began drumming, singing, dancing, and smoking weed. Looking back, one might wonder about the safety involved while smoking the chalice under the wings of a jumbo jet. The euphoria took the Jamaican government and the emperor by surprise. Initially, the emperor hesitated to disembark because of the breach in protocol. He may have thought that it was a coup being organized in his name and without his knowledge. The Jamaican officials had to reorganize. They requested an esteemed elder and member of the Rastafari community to enter the plane and explain to the emperor what was actually going on. His name was Martimo Planner. He became a key leader of the Nyabingi House of Rastafari. He had visited Ethiopia and had met the emperor as part of a governmental delegation a few years prior. The visit gave legitimacy to the movement and created an understanding among the Jamaican grassroots and also the so-called elite of Jamaica. The Ethiopian monarch's mission to Jamaica accomplished many things. The emperor met with Jamaican government leaders, including the then Prime Minister Hugh Shearer, cementing diplomatic ties between the two nations. He established the Shashamane land grant and welcomed Africans in the diaspora to relocate to Ethiopia. After the visit, the Rastaman and women somewhat had a voice. They enjoyed less persecution and more respect. The men were able to come out of the hills and walk the streets of Kingston. The emperor himself practiced the Ethiopian Orthodox Christian faith. Therefore, he sent an Abuda, or high priest, to Jamaica and established the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church in Kingston. Today, the anniversary of the visit is celebrated as Groundation Day. It established the foundation of Rastafari and rooted it firmly in Jamaica. A common misunderstanding about the Rastaman was that he was a Blackheart man. Many people assumed that many of the rumors and the government smear campaigns were true. They interpreted the term Blackheart man to mean a man who ate people's hearts. From the Rastafari view, this simply meant to love black people from the heart. Generally, the word dread is also rejected. It suggests that the person is dreadful. All this culminated in the wholesale social exclusion of a significant portion of the Jamaican community. Today there are different ideas and approaches within Rastafari culture and the movement in general. The Ethiopian World Federation was set up by His Imperial Majesty to organize into one body Africans all over the world. It was headed initially by Malaku Bayan. Dr. Bayan was a brilliant organizer. He acknowledged that the EWF had learned much from the Garvey movement. He received his medical degree at Howard University in Washington, D.C. During his years at Howard, he forged lasting friendships with members of the black community and, at Emperor Haile Selassie's request, he wanted to enlist African American professionals to work in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian World Federation, incorporated as an intergovernmental organization on August 25, 1937, but unfortunately, Dr. Bayan passed in 1940. The EWF was in line with the Pan-African vision and the work of the UNIA. It had gained many of Mr. Garvey's followers. It was the organization that Haile Selassie founded to help organize and strengthen the Pan-African organizations around the world. The EWF issued a charter to the Rastafari leaders. They set up the first chapter in Kingston. As a splinter of the first chapter, the 12 Tribes of Israel was established. This house within the Rastafari mansion was greatly responsible for the growth and development of reggae music, Bob Marley being its most famous member. The 12 Tribes of Israel was established by Vernon Carrington. He became the Prophet Gad. The 12 tribes managed to incorporate from an earlier stage many educated Rasta within its movements. The youth black faith was the direct historical precursor and catalyst that evolved into the modern Nyabingi order and the other houses. The youth black faith represented the radical, foundational aspect of the Nyabingi movement in the late 1940s and 1950s. It was inspired by anti-colonial literature and Pan-African pamphlets that were smuggled into Jamaica. A young Bongo Watto started the youth black faith in Trench Town, Kingston, now home of the legendary reggae music. Music has been a feature in the Nyabingi order. Its early leaders were Ras Boanerges, otherwise called Bongo Watto, and Mortimer Maplano. Maplano was a mentor to Bob Marley. He was the man who had explained to Haile Selassie what was happening on the ground before he disembarked. The movement developed over time and adapted a strong anti-colonial African rallying cry. Many of the elders were at one point considered Bingi and operated under its unofficial banner. The name comes from a legendary African queen Nyabingi who may have lived in the Congo region of East Africa. The Nyabingi order is considered to be the oldest of the three often mentioned houses of the mansions of Rastafari. It had operated traditionally and helped to establish the theological foundation of the movement. The EABIC, Ethiopia-Africa Black International Congress, Bobo Shanti Order, was founded in Jamaica in 1958 by Prince Emmanuel Charles Edwards, otherwise known as Bongo Eddie. Many had dispersed from Pinnacle and from the St. Catherine Hills where they had established the commune, and had moved to Bacawal in West Kingston. Under the JLP government, again this settlement was destroyed in order to set up what is now Tivoli Gardens. The Bobo Shanti then moved to its existing location in the hills of 9 Mile, Bull Bay, overlooking the ocean. Bobo Shanti is distinct in this particular aspect. Most obvious is that they wear long flowing robes and cover their hair with bright turbans. Its founder and leader, Prince Emmanuel, was one of the elders who met with and received a gold medal from the emperor. This explains why Rastafari artists, upon entering the stage, often chant Holy Emmanuel I, Ear Rastafari. He also popularized the saying "Blessed my Lord," usually with a touching of the heart. This recognizes divinity within the person. This is Ubuntu again being established in the West. Ubuntu is an African conceptual idea, popular in the South. It that suggests that the Most High lives within human beings. The name Bobo Shanti or Bobo Ashanti references two powerful kingdoms in West Africa before the colonial era. The Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church is generally referred to as Judah Coptic, though not often considered as one of the official houses of Rastafari. It became a viable economic entity in the 1970s as a result of its overseas ganja trade. Its founder, Keith Gardner, established a commune in the St. Thomas Parish in Jamaica. It was called the Gospel Camp. His philosophy was anchored in the doctrine of Garvey's teachings, combined with an Afrocentric reading of Christian scripture, and also the requirement of cannabis as a holy sacrament. Naya partnered officially with some white foreigners from the U.S., and in 1975, the organization was officially incorporated as a church in Florida. Eventually, it controlled a massive commercial network. Before legal challenges arose, the Coptics had acquired luxury compounds in Miami, a fleet of shipping containers, and thousands of acres of land in Jamaica. Its beliefs are based on both the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, as well as the teachings of Marcus Garvey, self-reliance, Afrocentricity, and Ethiopianism. What the houses and organizations have had in common is a strong sentiment for Ethiopia, reverence for the emperor, and references from Marcus Garvey. In 1958, Rastafari elders came together and organized a protest at the National Heroes Park in Kingston. It was designed to strengthen the unity among Rastafari, especially among Bobo Shanti and the Nyabangi order. It was designed to be a peaceful protest against conditions at the time. However, it got out of control, and a statue of Queen Victoria was broken in the park. Again, the police response was brutal. Several of the leaders and organizers were badly beaten. Since then, progress has been gradual. In February 2026, the Pan-African world celebrated 100 years since the re-emergence of our story on the national scale. At this time the UNIA was in its high days. The Rastafari movement and its development over the past decades is comparable to the struggles described by the writers of the early church. It is important here to step back a little in order to see the progression. Alexander Bedward was born around 1850. This was in between the Sam Sharp Revolt and the Morant Bay Rebellion. He was active in the times after Paul Bogle and might have been inspired by him. Bedward lived and organized his congregation in August Town, Kingston. It appears he was raised as a Baptist/revivalist, but eventually he established his own brand and delivery method. Often, his movement is referred to as Bedwardism. He served as an inspiration to Marcus Garvey. He attracted large crowds and conducted healing ceremonies by the river. At one point, it was said that his movement had more followers than the Baptist Church at that time in Jamaica. He was before Leonard Howell, but he faced a similar treatment, as he was also arrested many times and sent to the asylum. He passed in 1930 on November 8, just days after the Ethiopian emperor's coronation. Another notable contributor to the development of Jamaican culture pre-independence was Archibald Dunkley. He had traveled to the Caribbean and became a seaman for the United Fruit Company. He too was moved by the idea of the crowning of a black king in Ethiopia and was convinced that the emperor was the return Messiah. He assigned biblical references to the circumstances in Jamaica and likened it to the Babylonian captivity of Judah in the 6th century BC. He, like his contemporaries, traveled from the town to the country, parish by parish, preaching their conviction that the King of Kings was the return Messiah. Archibald Dunkley was among the early preachers of the Rastafari faith. He is mentioned along with Robert Hines and Joseph Hibert and Howell for establishing the idea of the divinity of Haile Selassie and the foundations for Rastafari. Robert Hines was born in Linstead, St. Catherine. He became a follower of Bedward. He was also a revivalist and considered among the first Rastas. He led a march in 1921 which tested the colonial authorities. He was also a kind of lieutenant along with Leonard Howell. They were both sentenced to hard labor in St. Thomas. Robert Hines, at one point, had the largest Rastafari following in Kingston. Joseph Nathaniel Hibert was born in 1894. He spent a lot of time abroad, mainly in Costa Rica. He is said to have been a Masonic lodge called the Ancient Mystic Order of Ethiopia, a branch connected to the Prince Hall Freemasonic Order. Howell recruited Hybert and allied him to preach in Kingston. It appeared that they might have had some differences in approach regarding doctrine. All these circumstances and ideas converged, creating the movement that we call Rastafari today. Another thing that these men shared in common was how authorities responded to them. Sending the leaders to the madhouse was the second resort when they failed to convict. They were leaders who advocated strictly from the position of religiosity. They were also men and women like Una Marson, Robert Love J.R. Rogers, John B. Russwurm and Amy Jacques Garvey. These men and women were organizers in their own right, however, their background was more intellectual. Born on February 6, 1905, in Santa Cruz, Una Victoria Marson was a Jamaican activist and writer. She produced poems, plays and radio programs. She traveled to London in 1932. She became the first black woman to be employed by the BBC. This was during World War II. While in England she worked as an assistant for both Emperor Haile Selassie and the Honourable Marcus Garvey. Mr. Garvey was also inspired in printing and politics by Joseph Robert Love, known as Drive Love. Love was born on the 2nd of October 1839. In Bahamas. He was a medical doctor, a clergyman, a teacher, a journalist, politician and Pan-Africanist. He lived, studied, and worked successively in the Bahamas, the United States of America, Haiti, and Jamaica. He spent the last decades of his life in Jamaica, where he held political office. He contributed often to the newspapers and advocated for the island's black majority. Joel Augustus Rogers was a Jamaican-American author, journalist, and professional historian who focused on the history of Africa, as well as the African diaspora. After settling in the United States in 1906, he lived in Chicago and then in New York City. He was born on September 6, 1880, in Negritude, Jamaica. John B. Russwurm was born in 1799. He was a trailblazing abolitionist, journalist, and one of the first black men to graduate from an American college. He co-founded the Freedom's Journal, the first African-American owned and operated newspaper in the U.S. He later relocated to Liberia and became the first black governor of Maryland in Africa. Mrs. Honorable Amy Jacques Garvey was born in December 31, 1895, in Kingston, Jamaica. Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey was a Jamaican-born journalist and activist. She was the second wife of Marcus Garvey. She was one of the pioneering female black journalists and publishers of the 20th century. Amy had remained in Jamaica to take care of the children, while Mr. Garvey went to England, where on June 10, 1940, he transcended. This was during World War II. It is significant to mention that one of the first stops that Emperor Selassie made upon his arrival in Jamaica was a visit to the shrine of the Honourable Marcus Garvey at the National Heroes Park. He met also with the prominent elders of the Rastafari movement at the time at King's House. There, the King of Kings placed gold medals around the necks of Rastafarian grassroots leaders and thanked them for the resistance and for the outstanding work that helped to usher in Jamaica's independence and strengthen the cause of Pan-Africanism. There have been many elders and teachers over the years. However, it is reggae music that has served as the main vehicle for popularizing the culture. Musicians have always played a special role in shaping African culture. They often acted as the griots and gel in West Africa. They documented the victories and helped to amplify myths and stories about the kings. They also kept records in a society where writing was sometimes frowned upon, and the power of memory was emphasized. Reggae music often bears striking similarities with West African classical sounds, particularly the Malian classics. Salif Keita said in an interview in French that reggae music is the highest form of African music. The music has documented and has popularized a lot of the grassroots events since its inception. After the 1966 visit of the Emperor, Jamaica's music took on a whole other tone. Since then, more and more lyrics were dedicated to the Emperor. The local music genre, through the years, can provide a timestamp in terms of what was happening on the ground in Jamaica during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and up to the present. By the 90s, dancehall became more popular in Jamaica itself. but it is still considered a form of reggae. It introduced the synthesized beat, and over time the topics shifted. However, the African sentiment has not been lost entirely. Jamaican music itself can be catalogued in order to provide a chronology of the local culture. Jamaicans as a whole have never given up the idea of Pan-African unity and the African cultural identity. Many still hope that one day we will return to live and help develop the motherland. Mr. Garvey's grand vision has often been limited and defined simply as a Back to Africa movement. Sometimes it is talked about as if the plan was to just pack up and leave. The program involved reclaiming identity, culture, and engaging in international trade. The African Communities League organized small and large-scale business and also provided management services. This was a thought-out program for African people's long-term development. Most importantly, the Garvey program taught African philosophy. Though he never set foot on the continent, it was his program that encouraged and inspired the early African independent leaders. He sought to repair the psychological challenges and unite African people all over the world. Some Jamaican scholars today have continued on this path. Some have worked closely on the reparations issue in modern times. Mr. Garvey and also Malcolm X brought this claim. However, the protocol is that it requires a sitting government leader or representative to officially make the charge. Recently, Ghana's President John Mahama presented a formal grievance and statement of redress to the United Nations. He presented a 10-point plan to remedy and mitigate the ongoing systemic imbalance. Professors at the University of the West Indies Mona campus in Jamaica have been directly involved in crafting the language of this redress. From the Caribbean, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados has been the most vocal for reparations. Many intellectuals have also been involved in the development of Pan-African studies and the struggle over the years. One in particular is Professor Walter Rodney. He was a strategist and an organizer. He had experienced grounding with the Rastafari and lived in Jamaica's inner-city communities. He was born in Guyana and came to Jamaica after he had spent a few years as a professor in Tanzania. He was a student himself at the University of the West Indies, and in 1968 he returned as a lecturer. He ran into issues with the local government, mainly because of his Pan-African stance. As a Guyanese historian, he first attended the University of the West Indies in Jamaica in 1960. He returned in 1968 as a professor, but his tenure was abruptly cut short. Unlike many academics at that time, Rodney lived in West Kingston and worked directly with the poor and the marginalized. He deeply engaged with the Rastafari community and helped to raise cultural and political awareness. These groundings directly inspired his famous book, The Groundings with My Brothers. In it he documents the struggles and the state of African consciousness in the Caribbean. He states in this book that he was shocked by the way Jamaicans, and in particular the Rastaman, were able to comprehend the world with limited reading and effort. And this while never leaving the island. He also complains a little about a certain unwillingness and general assumptions within the group at the time. In October 1968, after attending a Black Writers' Conference in Montreal, the JLP government, led by Prime Minister Hugh Shearer, declared him persona non grata and barred him from re-entering the country. His banning sparked a massive outrage at the University of the West Indies that morphed into violent civil unrest in Kingston. This became known as the Rodney Riots. This unrest demonstrated his immense influence on the working-class students and Rastafari. Walter Rodney, C.L.R. James, Stokely Carmichael, and others have embraced a unique brand of Marxism mixed with Pan-Africanism. Walter Rodney's core theory, and most famous book, is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. It posits that Africa's poverty is not a natural state of backwardness, but the deliberate result of centuries of unequal exploitation by Western capitalist and colonial powers. He famously argued that Africa developed Europe at the same rate that Europe underdeveloped Africa. This kind of worldview is also supported by cultured academics like the esteemed Professor Ivan van Sertima, who is also from Guyana, and by Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African Renaissance man from Senegal. We have arrived at another juncture in the road of freedom and cultural expression, and the focus today is on historical clarity, identity, and operational unity. The solution is to Sankofa. The goal is to recognize a unified worldview. This will require a careful review of some of the mistakes made in the past. It also requires updates to the narrative and taking into account the information that was not available at the time to many of our esteemed elders and greatest leaders at that time. And at the same time, we must continue to build upon the very foundation. In its most active days, the movement did not distinguish between the conscious African mind, matted hair and the bearded man. It was based on the social consciousness of the people. When Bob Marley used the term crazy bald head, it was likely used symbolically to represent an anti-African attitude and the lack of cultural awareness among blacks and whites. The song Chase Those Crazy Bald Heads Out of Town was a hit. However, many wise words and hit songs are metaphorical. It is not likely that Bob Marley intended to create division among African people on the basis of hairstyle. The vision and the narrative of Pan-Africanism was expressed by the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey and His Imperial Majesty. It may be best described as the vision to unify and strengthen the position of African people worldwide. Today technology helps. It can help us to link up via WhatsApp or on the internet. The main obstacle in the way of progress in terms of operational unity are the lies that they told us about them and the lies that they told them about us. Today we enjoy easier access to historic and current information. We can take a flight to the African continent. As a result, we can employ new fact-finding missions. It's very important to talk with the Africans who remained on the continent. Either way, we must utilize the analytical approach and the methodology of research and fact-checking. Today, programs can be facilitated online or in person. The key is to use established references and experienced facilitators. The challenge is to transition from Negritude to the Renaissance. At this juncture, a more pragmatic approach is needed to establish the kind of collective thinking that is based on practical solutions and strategy. This renewed psychology is centered and based on African philosophy. One of the most profound statements that came out of the Rastafari movement was stated by the elder Mortimer Maplano. He was clear when he said that it will require a new faculty of interpretation. This was about our ability in the West to grasp core African cultural ideas and understand Ethiopia. On this journey, there are forks in the road. We are at a point where, in order to advance, we must revisit the question of cultural and historical identity.